welcome to the Power of Percussion podcast. My name is Kay Michelle Lewis, and I will be your host today. Our next guest is Dr. Jane Bentley from Glasgow, Scotland. Everybody welcome Jane. Hi Jane, how are you today?
Hello, I'm doing well. The sun is shining here in Scotland.
Yes, it looks snowy like it is here in Kentucky. That's awesome. So good to see you today. Whoa, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, well, I've been a drum circle facilitator for about 21 years now, if I count it up. So it's been a huge journey in a sense, and that took me all the way from my first really bad drum circles, which I'm so ashamed of now, um, all the way through doing a lot of work in health and well-being context, going into prisons and drumming, um, and eventually studying drum circles. I think for a while I kind of sat between the music education and music performance and even that and the more kind of therapeutic aspects. And I was just in this middle point and realizing that drum circles kind of occupied that point between education and therapy and performance, but they weren't necessarily either of them. And there was something different at work, so I think I ended up doing this PhD just asking, what are we doing?
Yeah.
What is going on here? How can we pin down this thing that isn't either of them? And is there something else emerging that we can define? So that took about 7 years,
Yeah.
and now I'm still a freelance facilitator and trainer, and also now I'm one of the Village Music Circles trainers for the UK.
Oh, awesome. Congratulations.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah. So with your PhD, can you tell us about what you studied and what the findings were?
Sure. I did a qualitative study, so a lot of that was talking to people, which was a sheer joy and a great excuse, basically, to have all these conversations you always wanted to have with people that you really admire. Um, and so I interviewed facilitators, I interviewed participants in drum circles, and I did that between the UK and the USA, and also did some comparison between the kind of facilitated drum circles that we know, and also the work of Music for People, because I saw them working in this similar way, of involving people in music making very quickly and very accessibly. Um, and just seeing that there's this new kind of field of musicality emerging.
Yeah.
Um, so it took me about 7 years to get there. And I think what came out of it was that there's a phrase that Arthur Hall uses a lot of teaching without teaching.
Yes.
And I know, especially as music educators, I said, well, what are we doing then? Um, and so that was one of the questions for me. There's clearly a developmental process that goes on in a drum circle from the start to the finish. The group that we're with ends up in a very different place to where we started, but we're not, teaching rhythm patterns or time signatures or this is a particular type of drum. And I think based on all of the interviews and talking to all these people, what it came down to is that it's musical interaction, and it's that process of connecting with each other and connecting with a group as well. And the thesis ended up being called Tuning In, which, and that I believe is
I
what
love
we're
it.
teaching without teaching, is that every participant's ability in the circle to tune in to a greater and greater extent, perhaps first to their own abilities and potential for expression, then to what other people are playing, and gradually take that into account. And then from that, just beginning to connect their rhythms with each other and do something that builds this kind of big group conversation. And then, in the end of a well-run, well-facilitated circle, you end up in this place of kind of group consciousness where actually the facilitator isn't needed anymore, and the group has the skills to cooperate, to collaborate, to create based on each other's patterns, and to have that reciprocal movement that becomes almost like a musical shoal of fish or flock of birds to be able to take responsibility and create and change that music for themselves.
Yeah, that's oh, that sounds amazing. That sounds wonderful. I need to read that dissertation. I need to take it and read it soon. Whoa, so you are you've done so many things 20 something years. Wow. So why are you so passionate about percussion and this thing we call drumming?
Probably foremost, it was a personal passion to start off with. It all began when I was in primary school, and there was a drummer. We didn't back in the 1980s when I was at school. We didn't have people coming and doing drumming workshops, but this guy came and set up his drum kit in front of the whole school assembly, and played it for us, and
Awesome.
played a number of different rhythms, and it was mostly a demonstration, but for me, sitting there watching it, that rhythm, I'd never heard anything like it, and it kind of entered my soul, and it did something to me that other music hadn't quite done, and I already loved music. And it wasn't until I was about 18 that I began to drum properly. I managed to get my own drum. And it just snowballed from there. I think, then it was that experience of being present in a drumming workshop run by somebody else and feeling how that experience affected me. And I think I'm the kind of person, as soon as I find an enthusiasm that I like, I kind of want to tell everybody about it and share it. So it became a very natural thing to look into drum circle facilitation. And as I came back from this inspiring workshop and typed in how to run drumming workshops into the internet in 1999, up came Arthur's book, which had just come out, called
Oh,
Drum
awesome.
Circle Spirit. And just those three words captured me. The subtitle was Facilitating Human Potential Through Rhythm. Like, how could you not want to get
Right.
that book? And, I got it, I devoured it, I started running really bad drum circles. But I could see, even at that point, I could see how that worked on a group and changed a group, that people would talk to each other more quickly afterwards or relate at a different level. It almost felt like, we'd taken a shortcut to a deeper possibility of interacting with each other. Um,
Yes.
so from then on, I was hooked, and just wanted to try and take that out and to share that experience with as many people as possible, and particularly people who wouldn't otherwise get the chance to do that. I think that's the kind of niche that I've moved towards, in a sense.
Can you talk a little bit about that, like who you work with? Yeah.
Sure. It's tended to be, I do a lot of work in mental health at the moment, and that's been at all kinds of levels. So, all the way from people who are living with their condition in the community, and living, normal lives, all the way through to people who are very, very long term in a hospital, and in very kind of secure environments. And just seeing how drumming works at every kind of stage has been amazing. So even in the most secure settings, the guy that you know ignores you for the first week but then starts to want to help you pack up, the
Oh,
next week and
yeah.
the week after that, or hands an instrument to another member of the group. These small things could be huge in those settings.
Yeah.
um then it's also gone to, I've done a lot of work with people with dementia as well, and see the power of rhythm. Um, I think we're very familiar now with the idea that music, and particularly musical memory, is very powerful for people with dementia. But rhythm has its own power, and it's a passport to the present moment. And if that's what you have, if you have dementia, then drumming becomes, particularly improvised drumming, becomes the perfect vehicle to access that and to share time with people, particularly people who might not have access to language anymore. You can have a rhythm conversation, and
Exactly.
behaviorally that can leave somebody with that feeling of having actually had a conversation when those opportunities become so reduced in life.
And that is so magical. And like you said, that those opportunities have been reduced, and they've been reduced even more because of COVID. So it's even more important now than ever to be having these rhythmical conversations with others. And I know you've done some virtual as well, you know, in person and virtual. So how has that been going for you?
I dragged my heels a lot. I think you were a real trailblazer and jumping online and really going for it. I was so impressed to see what you were doing, and I'm a bit of a technophobe, so I had to get a webcam and do all this stuff. Um, but gradually, I think trying to figure out the elements of, obviously this other thing is denied to us at the moment, and you know I could lament that all I want, but actually there is a need for connection and interaction now. So what can we do with what we have? And I think actually working with people with dementia taught me a lot in terms of building that resilience of like, okay, here we are in this situation now, how can we build a response to the now?
Yes.
What can we do with what we have, and the capacities we do have? Um, so I think, I mean, certain things have opened up. Like it's brilliant nowadays that you can have a hugely international workshop, with people from 8 countries all making music. And
Yeah.
I think I've learned to rely on the visual aspect more. And that was something that came up in my thesis, that music and rhythm are not at all solely an auditory phenomenon. There's a
Interesting.
visual element to
Yeah.
it, there's a kinesthetic element to it, we embody it. There's a social element to it. Contact with other people will modify how we express ourselves in rhythm from a really early age. So I
Interesting.
think some of the, not exactly strengths of Zoom, but the possibilities of Zoom have been to really do that thing at the beginning of some kind of workshop of actually trying to help us connect ourselves with each other visually. Um, and to that's the spontaneous thing where we can interact,
Yes.
and the actual sound and the percussive beats is less possible. I mean, there are ways to do it, but rhythmic sound is nearly impossible. Um, so I've also, I've got into things like looping as well as a way to create a sound environment for people, so that even if you're playing alone at home, you're playing along with something that sounds more like 20 or 30 people drumming
Yeah.
together.
That you're
Um,
like in a group situation.
yeah, we can do that thing of kind of fooling ourselves into it. And I think if we're doing that whilst looking at a lot of other happy people doing the same thing, um, of course it will never be the same, but I've had some lovely, lovely experiences with different groups online. Um, and I think the further we get into this, the more value we see in it. I think particularly at the start, some of the groups I worked with very regularly, we tried to come online and people went, "Oh, this is rubbish. I don't like this." And it's not as good as when we normally meet. But as we've gone on, actually, it's still that moment in the week when people could come together and see each other, and interact and be playful and responsive and reciprocal with each other, to share ideas. And so some of those things are still available to us as well.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. That's great to hear. So when you hear the words power of percussion, what does it make you think of?
Mm. Really interesting choice of words. So, yeah, sometimes I think a lot about the power of rhythm as one thing.
True.
And I see that happening a lot. We've talked about how that might operate in people with dementia as well, particularly, as something that is, it's always, music by its nature arises and kind of dies the moment it's born. So it is a very present moment thing, and rhythm can draw us into that. I think the power of percussion. Um, I love the diversity of percussion. I've just bought one of these kind of electronic drum pads,
Oh,
which I'm
cool.
enjoying a lot. It's very helpful
Yay.
for the lockdown things, and it's got all the knobs and the sounds and things. Um, and in playing it, I'm delighting in some of these sound effects and things. But actually, it's made me realize that what I love about percussion is the possibilities of an object and figuring out how this object resonates and makes a noise and how those sounds relate to other sounds. So as much as I've enjoyed this new thing, it's made me think, no, actually I'm quite an analog person that I do like concrete objects and this fascination with what they do and how they resonate and how to get a sound from it. And then I think there's a power in doing percussion together as well. And I think that's a very unique thing that does bring us together in a group in a really different way to so many other things. I think it does create and build and help sustain relationships in a group of people.
Yeah. Well, how has percussion, you've already spoken a little bit about this, how has percussion made your or another person's life better?
Mm. Well, it's transformed my life. I think it's been a huge journey, kind of since I was about 18 years old. So my life is entirely different to how it would have been without percussion. Um, but I've seen, because of the different places I've worked, I've seen its effect on lots of other people. And I think probably the thing that jumps most strongly to mind is a group that I've been working with for about 13 years now. And this is a group for people experiencing mental health difficulties. And some of the group have come for that whole period. We've got
Whoa,
one member who's been for about 13 years,
that's
and she
awesome.
would say, it's kept me out of hospital.
Whoa, that is
She said she's
awesome.
regularly boomeranging between the hospital and community, and that actually, she hasn't been back, she hasn't had these huge, huge crises that she had before. There's other members of the group that have said, this has saved my life. And I think, it's a combination between the activity of drumming and percussion, but also finding each other as community and having that group of people who start to, because of playing music together, um, starts to build those relationships. And if we can have that kind of consistency and that presence for each other, we learn how to relate to each other better. And this group is now a really solid community of people, and those musical relationships have translated into relationships where people are there for each other and will support each other. Um, if somebody's having a bad day previously, if they were quite socially isolated, that then can spiral into a visit into hospital. Maybe now they've got friends who they can reach out to and know that they can phone and call. And obviously this doesn't work all the time, but it's I've seen a very, very significant effect on the members.
And is that the buddy group? Is that the name? What is
It's called the Buddy Beat.
the
Yeah.
Buddy Beat? Okay, I was
Yeah.
looking at this on your website and I was like, that is a really cool program. But I didn't
Mhm.
know that it had been around that long, and that is really cool to hear that that many people have stayed around that long. So it does show the power of rhythm and group drumming, um, and what effect it has on people for them to stay that long and really feel that connection and community with one another. And really, that is so important more now than ever. I mean, it's important all the time, but for, a lot of people that are not able to get out and, commune with others, that is really great that it's been around that long. So thank you for starting that program, and maybe that'll inspire some other people to do something similar.
Well, it was designed as a transitional program to start with, so that if we've been into the hospital and somebody might have had a spell in a psychiatric hospital who then gets exposed to something like drumming while they're in hospital. But I think making that transition to the community can be really hard because a lot of community groups aren't set up to be quite as accommodating and welcoming. And so the project was set up to be present in the community, but to be a place that people could come to from hospital. But then also, once they're discharged, that's not the end of the story. They can keep coming and keep making that a part of their lives and building that into it. And then from that place, then going out into the broader community not as the mental drumming group, but as a drumming group, and engaging in community events and doing workshops for other people. So
Mhm.
that group's been out in the community and helped me out, doing workshops with older people as well, or kids who have autism, or
Oh, that is so
um,
inspiring. That
for
is
people
so
to go
inspiring.
from being that kind of service user to actually a service provider. And I think that's another huge part of that journey for people to say, I still have something to give and something to
Yeah.
share.
Oh, that is so inspiring. Thank you. Wow. Oh, so you spoke about your new drum that you have, your electronic drum. But is there a kind of like a go-to type of drum that you love to use in your facilitation?
It's probably a very, very cheap djembe, actually. Something with a synthetic head that can be wiped clean. Something I'm not overly attached to. Um, that can take whatever is thrown at it. Um, yeah, I actually ran around the house looking for my favorite drum. So my favorite drum is actually one that I would play in performance settings and situations. It's very treasured. Um, my work equipment is very kind of hard wearing. I love the drums that Remo make because they last forever and they're bomb
Yeah.
proof. Um, and so there's less emotional attachment to my to my work kit, and then huge emotional attachment to my kind of personal drums and my personal kit.
Yeah.
But I love the djembe as a drum for its size. It's a very human sized drum. Um, the ease at which you can create simple tones. Um,
Mm.
it's a beautiful genius invention of a drum.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. It always helps to know, different people have different, drums that they gravitate to that they work well with. It's like they're in relation with this drum and maybe another one doesn't speak to them as well. It's
Mm,
really fascinating to me to know how each person works
yeah.
with that. So thank you for sharing.
Well, I'm moving towards frame drums a lot. I think as I travel more and visit quite far-flung places, um, it's much easier to take a kit full of drums. And I think there's a lot of beauty and subtlety in a frame drum as
Yes.
well. And it offers lots of different possibilities as being able to share it with somebody, or um, it still has a lot of different voices, and I've had some very, very beautiful workshops with just frame drums. I
Yeah.
think when I started out, I thought I needed all the big kit and this big spectacular thing. And actually, the older I get, it's less about having the kit and more about having the ability to do things with it.
Yes.
So one of my favorite things for an exercise now is just using pieces of paper
Oh,
and to see
cool.
how we can create musically with basically nothing. Um, so I'm almost falling off the edge and into the ideas of found sounds and junk percussion and things we can do with our bodies, and what's the essence of facilitation, that is still there without the drums, but still
Yeah.
using rhythm and percussive sounds. And I think that's a fascinating thing for me at the moment.
Yeah, me too. Less is more. You know that saying, less is more. And it really does get down to like you said, the essence of it, the rhythm. We were born with this rhythm. And when it began, we didn't have all those drums laying around.
Yeah.
We didn't have all that. So awesome. So, what are your most memorable moments in drumming and in your work that you do? I know you've had probably like a million, maybe, maybe more. I don't know. Over that many years, that's a lot of experiences. But
Yeah.
if something pops to your mind, what's a memorable moment?
I tend to remember the earliest kind of wow moments more strongly than all the ones that come afterwards. Um, and I think so. This would have been in about 2003, and it was probably the first time I was invited to go and work in a psychiatric hospital. And at that time, it was a friend of mine who was a music therapist who had invited me. Um, and at that time in the UK, it was much more seen as a one-to-one activity, very psychotherapeutic. And the idea of doing groups was just something that was emerging. And
Wow.
she was newly qualified and felt like she had to operate within the things that she'd been taught. But she'd been asked for group workshops and knew that I was doing this. And so that's how I first started kind of working in hospitals almost by this kind of back door. Um, and this was, again, still a time when particularly people with dementia were kind of written off,
Oh,
particularly if you were at the stage where you needed hospital care. Um, the idea of doing activities with people was something that was quite resisted, that would
wow.
only disrupt things or set things off. And so there was actually quite a bit of antagonism from some parties when I turned up with this big bag of drums to the hospital.
Oh, goodness. That must have been an experience.
Um, um, but nevertheless, she persisted. um, and brilliantly, there was a woman called Jeanette Allen, who was an occupational therapist, who just saw this happening and understood it and supported it from then on. And who was instrumental in starting this Buddy Beat drumming group as well. But this first workshop, and I'd worked with lots of groups, but this was a very new group for me. And at that time, I was still doing lots of work with drums and sticks, which I've moved quite away from now. But this was what I was using. So we took it in. We had quite a small group, and people were brought in from the wards. Quite a variety of people. It was still the days where there'd been a lot of very, very long-term patients as well.
Mhm.
And there's been a philosophical shift around that now too. Um, and I remember one man was brought in, he must have been mid 80s, brought in a chair, very kind of withdrawn into himself, not, interacting with the outside environment. Um, and we started playing, and just this little finger
Oh,
started to move. So wow, the rhythm's working, and carried on, and this hand started to move, and then two hands, just himself. So I saw this and was like, well, this is like drumming. So I took him over a pair of drumsticks and brought a drum, and then all of a sudden it was like
whoa!
really
Big win. Big
cute drum
win.
solos came out. We had this beautiful rhythm conversation, hugely complex, very articulate rhythmically, and blew me away, kept me on my toes. He was a better drummer than me. Um,
Wow.
and then by the end of the workshop, he was quite buoyant, and his whole aspect had changed to looking out and being engaged. And the staff, as they went away, said he hasn't talked to anybody for 6 years.
Whoa.
Um,
Whoa.
so it was just this like night and day um, occurrence. And I think
Whoa.
probably, in the context of how his life potentially might have been in that hospital with very little interaction, it shows that difference of just, allowing these spaces for people to engage and connect, and
Yeah.
in never, ever underestimating people as well.
Wow. That is a miracle. If
But
I've
needless to
ever heard
say,
of
I was
one,
hooked after that.
I bet. Yes. Yeah, I bet. That sounds like a miracle moment right there.
Mm.
Whoa, thank you for sharing that. Oh my goodness. So, did you ever think, when you first started back, you said age 18, did you ever think that you would be helping another person by way of this drumming that you're doing and sharing in community?
Not initially. I think initially it was kind of a little private passion, and just learning by myself. And I think when I started, there were no other drummers that I knew roundabout either. So it was a very private endeavor. And occasionally I would meet somebody, or if I went to see a band, I'd be watching the drummer very, very closely. And eventually, 6 months apart, I'd meet one person and spend an afternoon, or another person, and then keep on, and started playing with a lot of folk musicians, and kind of almost learning to drum quite self-taught and kind of in isolation from other drummers. Um, so it really didn't cross my mind at the start. But
Wow.
it's been a great journey. It's been lovely.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, if someone's looking for your services, where can they find you?
My website is www.artbeatmusic.org. So that would probably be the first place to look. You're very welcome.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you being on here. And you can check out Jane's TEDx video. It is amazing. It's called The Art of Following. Everybody check that out because you're going to see a demonstration of a huge group of people doing this whole drum circle type thing, but in a TEDx context. And it's a really, you did an awesome talk. So thank you for sharing that as well.
Very kind.
Um, yeah, is there anything else that you would like to share?
Wow, I think use drumming, use rhythm. I think it does things that so many things don't quite do. It's definitely its own thing, and it brings something to our lives in a very unique way. It's a great way to connect. It's super accessible, um, and I think yeah, there was a documentary came out recently called "We All Just Need to Drum," and I think that's
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
um, it's a great title.
Mhm.
Um, and I think I still, even now, still feel very evangelical, like I want to take that drumming message out, um, to say, we can all do it. Music is part of our birthright. And we deserve to use that and exercise that and to be able to have experiences with that.
Well said. Thank you so much for being on today. And
Thank you.
yeah, everybody follow Power of Percussion podcast. You can find us on all the social medias. And thank you again, Jane. Dr. Jane Bentley from Glasgow, Scotland, everybody. Check her website out. They're doing amazing things. Wow. Thank you.
Well, thank you for all your work and all the cool stuff that you're doing.
Thank you so much.